Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in to our webinar on the top 10 megatrends for 2020. For those of you who are joining us live here right now, you'll notice on the bottom of your screen as you're logging in, we have a couple of features I definitely wanted to highlight. One is the chat, so you're welcome to chat with others who are here right now, and you can throw your questions there if you want. Also, we have a Q&A. I don't know if we'll have the A part, but we'll have a response for some of the questions that come in, and we'll be sure to try to address some of those. Well, I'm super excited today because we'll jump right into it. The subject for today is the top 10 meta trends for 2020 and beyond. So the backstory for this is that our company, every year, we do some research on some of the emerging trends we see in multiple different fields. And as a part of that, I participate personally, and I try to identify, look at all of the various trend reports and try to bring in some type of sense of like, hey, here are the things in technology, the environment, consumer behavior, digital, retail, and the list kind of goes on and on. And I was actually using this research to prep for a series of presentations at conferences, but with COVID, that's changed. And so I thought it'd be fun to just kind of share with you some of our research. And on top of that, I thought it'd be more interesting than you just listening to me about the top trends. It was to bring in a good friend of mine, Travis. Travis is here with us. Travis, thanks so much for joining us today. Well, Travis, let me give the people here just a brief introduction. I'm sure most of them read it on our webpage, registration page. But Travis Mason most recently served as the Vice President for Global Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs at Airbus, where he worked with the company's global leadership and technical experts to bring emerging technology and new businesses like autonomous air taxis, on-demand helicopters, unmanned aircraft, and much more to market. Prior to this position, he worked at Alphabet as the Chief of Staff for Google X Engineering, where he focused on public policy issues facing the company's advanced technology efforts in robotics, aviation, renewable energy, and life sciences. And right now, Travis is in the midst of also spending a lot of his focus working towards creating really a movement of rule makers or people in policy. And I think in many ways trying to make policy cool. So Travis, thanks so much for spending a few minutes with us.
Excited to be here and see a lot of folks we know in the chat. So hello to everyone I know and everyone that I look forward to getting to know.
Great. So the way that I thought we could kind of format this is I'm going to just kind of go through and start sharing my screen a little bit around the deck, around the 10 meta trends. And I thought I would kind of present a few thoughts on each of these and then have you comment based on your experience. Obviously, you've been a part of projects that have been super in the frontier of technology, emerging technology, and as a result, I know you're part of companies that were creating products and goods and services that there were really no regulations for, or hardly any. And so we'll kind of navigate through this, but I know you're well read across not just technology, but in other spaces. So let's jump right in. I wanted to start off by just kind of framing what we mean by trend. And I think it's really important to kind of distinguish between a trend and a fad. The way that I'm framing it and we're framing it from ideation is that a trend is something that is emerging at a consistent pace. It is something that is going to happen. There may be some catastrophic things that may prevent it from coming to market, but the reality is that, like, all signs are kind of pointing to something emerging, and that would be a trend versus like a fad. There may be a particular dance that becomes a fad. I don't know. There may be certain types of styles in clothing or certain practices in business that sound interesting or novel. That may be a fad, but we're talking about trends. So these trends obviously have legs to them, have data behind them. People are already practicing it. And so our hope is that maybe as you're watching this, participating, asking questions, is thinking in terms of like, what do these trends mean for your industry or your vertical? And so let's dive into these top 10 trends. For example, the first thing that we're seeing, Towards that, if you stick around to the end, the good thing is I've asked Travis to also talk a little bit about the realities of, I know many people on this call are super creative. Some of you are leading companies and businesses and organizations that are innovating. Travis, at the end of our time together, we'll talk a little bit about really what role rulemaking has and its impact in the way your companies can actually scale. So we'll dive a little bit into that. But the first trend that we wanted to highlight was this thing called green pressure. I know for years now, probably over a decade, there's been a strong move towards having eco status. So if you're building a building, you want the LEED type of status, and people have worked hard to try to validate or certify that they are green. And what we're seeing, and on the picture here, you see Greta Thunberg, a 17-year-old Swedish environmental activist that many of you have already seen, is that she positioned this issue of things like, the environment and climate change as an existential crisis for a brand new generation of folks. And I think what we're seeing, and she is a prime example of this, is that there's a shift from being just having eco status to actually moving towards eco shame. And the idea is it's not just good enough that you certify that you're environmentally friendly, but on top of that, that you're actually doing business that creates positive impact also, whether it's in the environment or just in the area of purpose. Travis, have you seen this to be a reality in some of the circles that you work in? Do you have any thoughts on this first one?
Yeah, so just first say, I'm really glad to be here, and thanks to Charles for the opportunity. Charles is a great guy, and I can just, I know my story is very similar to the stories of many of you in the room right now. But on the green pressure part, I think one of the trends that I've seen kind of underneath this is not only shaming about the product being green or not, but the process to build that product being green or not. You can have a green car, you can have a green airplane, but that doesn't mean the process behind developing that airplane and developing that vehicle is also green. I was talking to a good friend yesterday about machine learning and automation and kind of all the good benefits that will come from that. But even those technologies have a footprint attached to it that may not be as green when you think about storage capacity for the data and all sorts of developments on that end. So yes, there is green pressure, but the pressure extends beyond the product into the process of building and creating that product.
Yeah. So definitely when you come to procuring or sourcing items necessary for like even the technology behind your business, it's starting to get like super complex. It feels almost like overwhelming. I know in one of our recent projects, we're working through making sure that there's multiple bottom lines to the business of our client. And sourcing properly seems, at one hand, a balance between almost like an impossible venture to something that sounds really good at a high level. How do you see like companies navigating this level of accountability? Like, how do you even like, work towards that level of commitment?
Yeah, it's tough because even when you look at what happened with CSR, it became kind of a gimmick in some respects, and diversity is another one of these gimmicks. It's like here's a standard that we want to meet, and because there's no real accountability that others can actually check these companies on in some respects, it's become kind of these apparatus or an apparatus within an organization that is kind of doing one-offs to accomplish that goal. And it's not really a robust approach and a reflex for the business. So I think what you'll see is people trying to push towards certifying what that means. What does green mean? And you see that with buildings. And by the way, some of that certification is not only on the way the building functions, but the way the building was built.
Absolutely.
And the uses around that building. So I think you'll see a similar push for green technologies. But it's going to be hard to do that when you think of each of the verticals that we want to see more efficiency and more of a green approach in.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'll definitely see similar things, but the accountability has to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so whether you run an organization or a nonprofit, that's going to be a reality. Here's another meta trend that we've noticed in multiple points of data points and research, and that is technology, polarization, and civil media. And I know you and I have had talks about this over many meals, and that is just kind of the nature of even everything from the algorithms on some of these social platforms that, you know, could potentially like reward, you know, you almost have to like create more extreme content to have people react to it, whether it's good or bad, whether it's left or right. I mean, it doesn't matter, but technology itself, and especially like in a social platform, does cause a lot of like natural polarization. And sometimes we are rewarded for speaking more on the extreme, like, you know, I'm sure everyone here may have experienced putting even a neutral comment about politics on a, you know, a platform like Facebook to see the bombardment. And I don't know how that works, but every time it's anything that's remotely political, I usually get bombarded with people on both sides. And so that's happening. And as a result of that polarization, there definitely appears to be a movement where people are gravitating towards smaller, more intimate digital communities, maybe communities that are less full of friction, or communities that are more productive. What are some of your thoughts on like technology, the reality polarization? We saw this in the elections, and I can only imagine what's going to happen this year in this year's election. But share some thoughts in this space of civil media.
Yeah, so I'll admit, you know, I don't know everything, but just my base thought on in this area is I'm really a firm believer that technologies has made us more of who we are.
Mhm.
And I really, you know, don't point the finger at technology. If I do, maybe there's one pointing at technology and four pointing back to us, because we really are, we're a polarized people. We're people that we like going off in our corners. I mean, the stats are very clear. We live close to the people we go to church with. We live close to the people that we identify with. We vote in that way. And so technology is really going to enable that more and more. So I think we're seeing that the technology is accelerating. It's an accelerant for really who we are and who we're becoming. I was just listening to the earnings call for Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg was talking about misinformation, and I think because we're so polarized, you have these jolts of just misinformation out there, things that are not true. And he talked about how one of their biggest jobs now is going to be labeling and determining what's good information, bad information, right information, and wrong information. And all of the platforms are in this kind of position. By the way, 5-10 years ago, they would never admit that they were a media company to be in the position to determine those sorts of calls. They didn't want to do it. They realized that it's creating it's eating away at the quality of their platforms. So they want people to feel welcomed, they want people to feel heard, and they want people to feel appreciated. I'm not sure that creates the sort of quality we want in our society,
Right.
when more and more are in our corners and just going back and forth about what we believe, and it's not really challenged by another perspective. So I don't have the solution for this. I just think my point is that, you know, it's made us more of who we are. And if we really want to change, probably the way to change it is for us to be more open to hearing opinions, and for technology to enable that.
Yeah, I mean, it does appear platforms like Facebook are leaning towards rewarding those who create relevant content for a specific audience. So whether it's private groups or pages, so it's less about, you know, obviously just about broadcasting things, but figuring out like, how do you create content that specific audiences actually want to consume? But I think that'll be a challenge, because like, I think it's still like shifting. I see more and more groups being much smarter about how they do content strategy. But you know, these platforms are going to be attractive if we can get to that place where content is, you know, somewhat personalized, anticipated, relevant, those kind of characteristics.
Yeah, and I would also say authenticity is
Yeah.
probably a theme that's becoming more and more important. And I will also say, when the tech giants are in the position of determining what's truth and not truth, whatever mechanism they use it. Some of them use independent individuals within their organizations, outside their organizations. But when they are in the opinion of determining and then labeling what's truth or not, there is a very high confidence that people will not engage with that content. Zuckerberg said on the call yesterday that whenever they label something that's been looked at by the fact checkers that's not true, there's a 95% chance that people will not click it. That's a big sort of authority that platform has to determine what sort of information you're able to look at and consider to be truth. And I don't have an opinion. I'm just I'm making a point that there is power in them determining what's right or what's wrong, regardless of the mechanism they use.
Absolutely. Well, the next one is an interesting one. And I think we inherently will desire some aspects of this. And it's really customer relevance. This is a third one, as a service. So it's really like the convergence of personalization and relevance as a service. That is products and services that change with the time and constantly adapts. So, I mean, I didn't know this, but like, for example, more than 54% of online shoppers pay for at least one box subscription, one subscription box. And it just kind of shows like if retail or, product companies can provide this ever-changing, not only demand, but desires, it's not just personalization at scale, but it's also like this, the sense of a human touch behind products. What does this mean for retail? In some of our research, we're seeing that, being digital first, even as a retail brand, is not necessarily the solution. Could, adaptive, like physical space, really become a great asset for retail? Everything from smart mirrors in stores to experiences, things like, I know some retail brands are working towards having a tailor on site, almost like a semi Nordstrom type of move, but for smaller places where people can get things customized. So we kind of see like consumer brands not almost like carrying a unspoken, I guess, responsibility to a certain extent to providing customers help in their pursuit of their own purpose, which is like so converged into the consumer at a level that goes beyond, hey, let's just be empathetic for the customer. I mean, this feels really deep. Like, what are you seeing when it comes to like customer relevance as a service?
So I'd be curious if you're in the room and you have if you're on chat, I kind of want to see what subscriptions you're connected to. I've tried some of these, and I've been excited like maybe the first couple of months, and then I'm like, do I really need someone to send me shirts that are like little bit, or do I really need this many kind of shavers, razors coming into me? So I think this space may struggle. What is Hungry Root? Interesting. HelloFresh, meal delivery, locally coffee beans.
Coffee beans.
Yeah, I think the food category will probably do better. That's just my gut reaction.
Yeah.
Because it's something that we really, really need, and I do think some of those companies are going to have to make it a little easier for us to kind of utilize these sorts of subscriptions, especially on the food side. So I don't know. I think retention of this space will be interesting. And someone just said, I'm a part of none too much wasted packaging. I agree with that. And going back to the first trend, I think this is something that Amazon will have to solve over time.
Absolutely.
Including subscription-based businesses. So I'd say the retention is the big question mark.
Yeah, because I know Amazon Fresh got criticized a lot for the packaging they sent the food in and how not eco-friendly the packaging was. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is kind of interesting because I know it wasn't listed here, but one of the other kind of sub things that were coming up is this idea of like digital twinning, this idea that we maybe will start to create almost a digital twin of ourselves that we can use, whether leveraging AI technology where they will take and do everything from like our bodies kind of carry on unique distinctiveness. We use that if some of you use iPhones or other type of facial recognition technology. So you can almost create a digital version of yourself with your exact measurements. So you could take your digital version avatar, if you will, an AI avatar, to go shopping for clothes so you can get the perfect fit even online. And so we see some of those things definitely emerging. I know you work in autonomous vehicles, and we'll cover that in just a moment a little bit more deeply. But when I see that one recent study of US and the UK drivers, like 50% express excitement about the idea of using in-car technology or the telematics of a vehicle to buy products ahead of time before they get somewhere. So definitely, I don't know where this will play out, but it's clear that people are working towards trying to solve for this space.
Yeah, it's still, I still think there's a human desire, and this doesn't apply to every area in the world, because if you go to, if you're in some parts of Asia, this is the norm. It is the norm to go to literally walk around the subway and use a QR code to pull together your shopping bag and go pick up your vegetables or whatever you decide to put in your cart while you're just in the subway moving from station to station. So this is they've solved some of that, but I think some people are still going to want the space. They're still going to want an environment that enables them to shop. And I don't know how much money is made off of shopping on airplanes today. I know it's a lot. I'm sure it could be exponentially more. But I think it's the space. It's like, I can't really shop on an airplane. And I think whoever solves the problem of blurring that virtual kind of click and desiring that real physical space to shop will actually win.
That's good. Well, let's keep moving along. I know we have 10. So the next one is pretty exciting for me, is the sense of a multi-experience, this reality of a virtual blur where, brands will be able to integrate things like text, touch, chat, gestures, voice, mixed realities, the sense of like a physical and virtual blur. It's really optimizing the relationship. Some have framed it like this: optimizing the relationship between humans and machines. And this is pretty clear. I remember reading not too long ago, Twitter just put out some marketing research around really blended realities. And so at one hand, I think people want to be more human. And you can see like some of the luxury offerings of some brands are really like these nostalgic human experiences. And then on the other hand, you have the aggressive movement of AI and the technologies that are automating a lot of experiences, customizing it. And so we see this multi-experience approach. So it's not just, good enough. You've seen this in, whether it's a Home Depot app or an IKEA app, kind of seeing furniture in your space before it comes in. But it feels like the multi-experience movement is a real thing, or a mixed reality experience, a real thing. How have you seen this kind of play out in some of the areas that you've worked in?
Well, I have shopped for some furniture using VR. I think it was CB2 that has this capability. You just see the chair in your environment, and so that's been cool. I think the interesting thing, I'm a policy guy, and I think the interesting thing that will happen is kind of how much of the physical world will we take in the virtual. There have been a lot of lawsuits about people getting harassed in virtual environments, about property claims in virtual environments. It's worth X amount of money, and the virtual environment went away and I wasn't paid for my property. So you're going to have these very interesting challenges that are going to happen ahead. And I think the virtual environment still has to solve the expectation of the physical environment. There's still an expectation that when I have on my Oculus headset, that, man, I'm going to feel either a jolt when I touch something, or, I'm going to have a little bounce, some sort of physical reaction. And you see this even how Disney designs all of their rides. Like, even though some of the rides have a huge virtual component to it, there's a physical manifestation of you flying over the woods, or you feeling water when you see water. So I think the challenge is still there to solve for the physical desires, even in the virtual environment, even if those environments are merged.
Mm. No, that's good. I mean, these are things that are emerging and I think people are solving for. And I think we're still in the early years of what a mixed reality looks like. I remember years ago, people, were asking like kids, like, why were they buying like digital coins on their video games or, and now it's like, yeah, of course you would. There's value associated with that purchase or, and so this is definitely an area to kind of keep in mind. If anything, like if you're running a business or an organization, thinking in terms of like, are we creating potentially, here's an opportunity, a multi-experience or some type of mixed reality experience for folks, whether it's a nonprofit helping some of its key donors go on a virtual trip instead of like physically going, to other products of like integrating into physical space as well as digital. So those are some things to keep in mind. The next one's kind of fascinating. I got wind of it like a couple of years ago, and this is the rise of virtual influencer. Like Lil Miquela, which is probably one of the most well-known ones. She was actually created by a DJ in California to almost be basically a fictitious personality. And initially it was sort of almost like a satire, sarcastic creation of creating this almost like a mannequin-like type of being that were posted on Instagram, created her own account, but she kind of took on her own following and people started to follow her. And now you see images of her from all around the world. And what some companies have done in light of this is to say, hey, instead of risking our brand on maybe real life celebrities, for example, why not create fictional characters that feel like they live in the real world? But what they can do is, they can control the content. This person never has to get in the type of trouble or the risk as some real life celebrities or influencers. But these type of like AI fueled also like virtual personalities are becoming almost content plays. In some ways, when I've told people this, someone are like, man, that's crazy. I would never follow someone like that. But at the same time, like if you've ever watched a movie and you watch the end of like a Marvel movie and you wonder what they did, the next day after that scene, you can kind of continue content almost like indefinitely and start following these virtual influencers or characters from films. So I see a huge market potential in the years to come if we could, like, if people could figure out how to leverage this. What are some of your thoughts on this particular trend?
Yeah, I'm curious if you follow any virtual influencers.
I follow her. I'm gonna create my own Travis Mason.
No. So they say virtual influencers have 3 times more engagement than a real one. That's big. 3 times is a big multiplier. And the interesting thing for me is that these actors or influencers are unpaid. They're unbiased. So for a brand, if you hire Travis Mason, you know what you're going to get. But if you make a virtual version of me, you don't have to pay me as a brand. You can rename me. And a lot of these virtual influencers are based off of a person, real or imagined. So I think you'll see some interesting questions about that because I'm a policy guy. These folks should be paid. And I'll go a little further. I stumbled upon an agency 2 weeks ago that represents robots. Blew my mind, but immediately, when you start thinking about it, it makes sense. Robots need representation too. They need someone to decide their fees for movies and to decide what's allowable for their images. And so this agency represents a number of robots. Some of them you've probably seen, from Boston Dynamics to other robots in the case of their art form. So, extending this virtual environment piece, I predict you'll see a similar thing. You may see agencies themselves, some of the traditional ones or the new ones, picking up clients that are virtual influencers and not real ones.
Yeah. Well, I know for those of you who are here live, feel free to share some of your comments on the chat. Is this like messing with you? Is this inspiring you? You know, like what are you thinking right now? Definitely, there's some comments coming in, just kind of working through it, clarifications. We're going to keep going, but you're welcome to leave some more comments as you wish. Let's talk about hyper automation. Number 6, hyper automation and autonomous integration. This is in some part, you know, a sweet spot of yours. So I'm not going to talk too much on my end. I definitely see a lot of this happening, even like AI as a service, sort of like SaaS, software as a service. I mean, I think I mentioned it earlier. I remember reading in The Economist that, you know, our face and bodies are becoming signatures. So when you see the rise of things like, you know, Alibaba, Smile to Pay, facial recognition payment system, to you know, transportation in places like Tokyo and the Swiss Federal Railways, they kind of take AI, but they are definitely trying some creative ways to mix it with human oversight as well. And then there's others who say basically AI will reach the intelligence level of a human being very soon. So when you think about this type of hyper automation that includes AI and machine learning and autonomous integration, how, you know, you've worked in, for example, transportation. I'm sure you have a truckload of examples in that space, but how is this going and what are some of the challenges as a policy guy too? I know it's not always the technology, but the policy required to actually activate it. So love to just kind of have you take your thoughts anywhere you like in this space.
Yeah, so I know AI is such a big word. It's actually a mouthful from a technical perspective. It can include a number of things, but
Yeah.
at its highest form, it's kind of a network, a brain that perceives something, detects some sort of pattern, and makes an understanding or an output based on that, and then continues to learn, just like our brain.
Yeah.
If many of us stood on a corner, we would be able to determine that that's a car. Some of us, if we're not colorblind, can say it's a red car or a blue car or a dark green car. Some of us who are really experts in vehicles in that space, we can probably tell you the make, the model, and the year it was developed. I can't do that for cars, but there's some people that can, because that part of their brain and their cognition are able to understand a lot about that particular item. And the reality is, right now in AI, there's a lot of discussions going on, but one of them is tricking artificial systems. And so what would it look like if someone was driving, or if someone was riding in a self-driving car, if someone put up a fake stop sign, or if someone put up a fake yield sign, or whatever. So if someone were to take kind of not look at the deep, what they call layers of the neural network that's being developed for the artificial intelligence, the actual core, but if someone were able to trick the eye, it's really hard if we were standing back on that corner to trick us. We know what a car looks like, we know what a car does, and the moment, especially if we're really good at looking at cars, the moment that we see something that's off, we're like, that's not a car, that's someone, you know, pretending that it's a car. But it may be a little easier for us to do that to some systems that are using cameras or other sensors to get their inputs into the brain of that system. And so I think that's going to be one of the real challenges. A lot of people are writing about it. Is how do we protect these sorts of systems from adversaries who seek to kind of confuse the system, not by getting in, because we think of hacking as kind of getting into the computer, but by simply you know, tricking some of the inputs into the system. So that's one of the big issues being discussed now with AI.
Yeah, I know you're part of you know, different autonomous vehicles and such, and I know you've shared with me in years past about some of the unique challenges of like even just because the technology is possible, you know, some of the roadblocks in policy or buy-in from cities. You know, there may be some here who are developing technologies. What are some things on the policy side of things that we could dive in a little bit more at the end of the a webinar today? But what are some of your thoughts, like to keep in mind as you're creating some new solutions, you know?
Yeah, as you're creating some new solutions, and I was just talking about the inputs that come
Yeah.
into AI, but if you dig into the AI itself, it's built by a human, and that human
Yeah.
has assumptions, bias, and what have you. There are systems that are determining sentencing for criminals around the world that are being used. And so what they've discovered is that there's some biases that have been built into those systems that determine whether or not someone spends 5 months in jail or 5 years or 15 years or what have you. And so I think the lesson is one of the big lessons that, you know, if you ever heard me speak, I kind of hit a lot is on making sure we have a very diverse perspective in anything that we build.
Mm.
Because, you know, the real level up isn't that we use the computer to do it. The real
Yeah.
level that the computer is a little bit better and more accurate than we are, and isn't encumbered by some of the tie downs mentally, emotionally, maybe that we are encumbered by. And one of those tie downs is our bias towards people who may not think like us or may not look like us. And so this is another big debate going on is, you know, how much should the government or whatever the governing body be involved in those assumptions that's developed for that artificial intelligence. And they're solving some of these biases, but some of them will continue as long as you have all males at a certain age with a certain background building these sorts of systems. So that's kind of one of those areas, Charles.
No, that's good. Well, let's keep moving along here. Number 7 is the democratization of technology. I know we can go in multiple directions, but just kind of the premise, the idea is that, you know, the world is flat to a certain extent, and to build things because of access to technology, you know, this has ramifications for, you know, we're seeing it definitely in like universities, the fact that people can get training apart from formal education. I know there's definitely some still value in, you know, getting credited from a recognizable accreditation source. There may be others argue that maybe universities still have definitely other types of value as far as like everything from the alumni network. So there's other, like, not just the learning part of it, but in other fields as well. You know, when you're like, say, you know, I'm in consulting, but you know, as there's more access to information, really good information too, could there be, you know, versions where I become obsolete in what I do potentially because of the, you know, the democratization of technology, whether it's in app development, whether it's data and analytics, design, just kind of the knowledge bank. Uh, is this just like, I know years ago, like books like The World is Flat and others just kind of emphasize that we're kind of entering the season. What are some things to be mindful of if you're like building something or building a business? Like, what are you seeing in this conversation?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I said before, how much of what we're building to be better is inhibited by what makes us not so great at times. And democratization of technology is an interesting one. If you go anywhere in Silicon Valley, you will hear democratization all around. People are
Yeah.
democratizing pie delivery, democratizing coffee, democratizing, I don't know, anything. And it's one of the words that bothers me because sometimes it's not pure democratization. It's
Right.
merely making that product available for the people who have means to use that product, which isn't true democratization. It's kind of democratization for whom. And I think that's one of the things to keep in mind, that as you use technology, who is it benefiting? Who is it going to reach? Who is it going to manipulate? Who is it not going to manipulate? Or who does it have a greater chance to manipulate? And I think that's one of the things we're seeing in the democratization debate. Flying cars are great, but if the price of getting a flying car from point A to point B is $90 to $150 per trip, we already know just by definition
Yeah.
that certain people can only get in a flying car. If to get in a scooter, it costs me the same trip to get from point A to point B than an
Yeah.
Uber, you know that's limiting the folks getting access to that scooter. So I think you know you're going to have a call for a foul around this democratization argument in many places, both for hardware and for software.
Yeah.
Approach.
Yeah. So somehow protecting or guarding that intent and being accountable to that seems like to be the challenge in this space.
Yeah, and I think, just to use one of my one of my phrases, we're all rule makers, and so what if Twitter and Facebook had realized that they should have been more governing early in the life cycle of their product than they did before? Maybe the Russia situation would not have happened in the way that it happened.
Yeah.
Maybe they'd have a better approach to taking down content. So whatever sort of technology you build or approach you decide to go down, you really have to not kind of shy away from really thinking deeply about how that platform is going to be used,
Yeah.
and what your role is in determining what's right and what's wrong use on that platform.
Yeah. No, that's good. Well, number 8, it has been a pretty hot topic, especially the last couple of years. And you should kind of see a picture of Zuckerberg there. Number 8, data transparency, traceability, and choice. In speaking with those, and we've had some really great folks at our conferences as well, talk about data and the reality of, even to actually live in a world where you can make those choices seems very burdening. In other words, like you kind of need to read everything and then decide whether or not giving up that particular data is worth not being on the platform. I mean, so walk us through that. I mean, the reality is like people are collecting data everywhere. So, when you think about when people bring up things like privacy, like I just wonder, like practically, could there be such a thing? And if that does, how will we get there?
Yeah, so I think, by the way, there was a movement to actually make terms of service documents that you sign. You sign up for a game or an app, and
Yeah.
you go through and no one reads them.
Yeah.
Or a lot of, and if you read them, just next time you go through one, actually sit and read it, because you probably won't use the app. You'll probably be like, whoa, wait a minute, who are you sharing what with?
Yeah.
Twitter, by the way, just updated theirs kind of quietly in the midst of a pandemic, which is always interesting when companies update when there are other big things happening in the world. But I will say, privacy, some of the experts say it doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
And it's a trade-off. If you have a free service that you're not paying for, maybe you should give your data over to make that service better and better over time. I think for the future, as you think about it moving forward, there are lots of conversations now on us owning our data, and not only owning our data, but actually being in the position to be paid for the use of our data. And so I think many folks you'll start to hear a lot of folks talk about this. And I think that's the direction this sort of debate is heading, is compensation for my data because I know it's being used.
Yeah, for sure. And others are, obviously it's not all necessarily like evil intent behind data collection. I mean, a lot of that is to improve products and services. Some of it is to maybe even get to a place where you could improve life, as some would, hold to. So, but you're right. I mean, would you say a rule of thumb is like, the reality is really privacy is not completely real at this point? Like, how do you advise people when it comes to, because I just assume anything I type anywhere or use on my computer could be found. So in that sense, I'm like, I'm just gonna, if I could leverage some of that, like sometimes I do like ads coming my way, if it's a platform, because it's kind of convenient for me and some of the products I actually want to use. So I'm glad they found me, So what are your thoughts on how do you advise people on this topic?
I'm a little paranoid, but I do have a spectrum of friends. I have friends that are like really paranoid.
Yeah.
And their use on the internet is a little different than mine. And I have friends that are just like, I don't care. I'm signing up for everything. I'm kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
I think the reminder is that this is a super messy space. And when there's a messy and gray space, that means a lot of the black and white things that you signed up for may not be so black and white. There's really no single US law for privacy. When you think of GDPR, which is the big privacy law that was
Yeah.
just passed in Europe, there's gaming of that already happening. And the gaming is the government set a law, but they don't have a way to enforce it. They don't have monies and mechanisms to enforce it, which means kind of the law may not really exist. So I think even though you read black and white, just assume that it may be a little bit gray,
Yeah.
because some of these companies are going through court proceedings, lawsuits are going to happen, and what seems to be black and white will start to gray a little bit, and what seems to be gray will start to become a little black and white.
Yeah.
So I mean, one of these topics where I say, you know, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. The next one is number 9 is the focus on personal well-being as a result of pretty much burnout from the modern life. And on top of that, we see an extra layer of that coming from the reality of everything that's happened with COVID. The point here being is that when you look at like some of the app growth, the types of apps that are coming to the surface, there is an opportunity for innovation here, growth in demand for digital health technologies. I know a lot of various medical groups are doing better. It's still not, I don't think it's there yet, but you know, little things like finding doctors and making appointments. I mean, I've used telehealth several times over the past month. You know, consulting by phone, completing paperwork in advance, becoming a little bit more efficient in the way that we're communicating. And I know there is a security issue in some of those realities, but personal well-being seems to be a space, and this is probably a reaction of the past decade too, of just being constantly on our devices and being overwhelmed, interacting with the Internet of Things, going to various physical spaces where the integration now is getting more and more seamless. In the midst of that, how do you create mind space? Do you have friends in this space or people who are working in this space that, you know, see this as a advantage right now, opportunity?
Yeah, so I think there's a huge focus on well-being. That category has blown up in the App Store. It has some of the highest retention rates.
Yeah.
In other words, they stick with their apps. They stick with, you know, if they're using Nike, they stick with Nike for months and months. It's very engaging with their friends, or they're gaming themselves. So I think the gamification of health is definitely going to continue. I think when you look at the more medical leaning side, there's no doubt that the more sensor input that a medical professional has, the better potential care you could have. I worked on a project at a company prior that looked at, you know, can we take data points from the human body and baseline your health based on another male at the same age, with the same race, with the same sorts of other variables, and determine whether or not you're healthy or not. Because really, health should not just be determined on you individually. It should be determined on some comparative basis as well. You know, you also know, at least medical professionals also know, the body tells on itself before it gets sick. Before you have a stroke, there are things that happen in your body that if there were sensors kind of within your body, maybe you could be rushed to the hospital a lot sooner than not. Maybe care could be given to you over time quicker than it is. Because when you go to the doctor's taking your word on things. Yes, they're taking some inputs, blood pressure, looking at sorts of other things, but they're really taking your input. Do you smoke? You know, how often do you drink? And, you know, people lie. People also don't remember conveniently. And so the doctor is basing their care of you on those sorts of inputs. So if the inputs were better, maybe the care could also be better. So it's no doubt that this category is going to be important. And I think it's a category to watch. HIPAA, kind of words that you guys have heard, that big piece of law makes a lot of this complicated. And they're also at the same time trying to fix that. Laws around health information. So this is a big category. I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's true of from a technology standpoint. I think it's also true of companies really trying to focus more on the well-being and all of even the business benefits that come from people who are healthy, you know, they're less depressed. You know, it impacts productivity. The amount of hours that are used on sick days and other things like that are pretty substantial. So this is definitely, it makes sense at many levels, obviously at a personal level, but even at a corporate community level as well. So that's great. Last but not least, and then I'll ask Travis some questions about rulemaking. I think you'll find that portion pretty interesting. So please stick around if you have a few extra minutes. The last one, just briefly right now, is just talking about creativity as social currency, and just kind of the base idea of this is that in order to kind of be sticky as a brand, it's really important to leverage creativity. And I know that's always been generally true, but at a whole different level, when you think about, you know, do brands play a role in helping people fulfill their purpose, or, you know, reach their potential, or, you know, you see that in a lot of different types of, like, whether it's a health app, a sports app, there's many different ways you can help customers, quote unquote, get there. So, and then when you look at, you know, art, communications, I mean, even during this crisis, I've definitely seen a lot of artists create new avenues through which to create, whether it's through imagery, live art, you know, whether it's some type of exhibit. There's things that people are kind of disrupting the space. And when you look at who's being followed on platforms like TikTok and others, during dinner last night, I asked our daughter who are the most popular people on some of these channels. And I got to say, like, most of the people I've never heard of, but, you know, one person have over 100 million subscribers on YouTube. I mean, it's just amazing on what carries social currency nowadays. I know you're a super creative guy as well. Like, what are some of your thoughts on creativity?
Yeah, so I'll use a word that I don't like too much, democratization. I will say, in the sense of creativity, in
Yeah.
the creative areas, we have seen a democratization in that space. We have seen people get record deals that previously would not have if they didn't have following on Instagram and whatnot. And even some of those people say, I don't want a record deal from the traditional company. I want to go out on my own. And you're seeing that across the verticals. I have a good friend that is heavy in the art scene and a lot bigger than I understood, because I'm not an art guy. But he built a following on social media, and he has a studio that's now part of one of the most reputable galleries in the world. And so you're seeing a democratization of creativity. The World Economic Forum does a Future of Work report, and one of the interesting lines in there is they said robots may get us there faster, but they can't be as creative as humans yet. And I think that reminded me that technology is really our competition for creativity. And that includes the algorithms that determine whether or not you're placed high or not. In TikTok, since that algorithm is I think it's randomized, and it's somewhat of a lottery system, unlike Instagram. So you have a greater chance of potentially trending on TikTok. So it's interesting. All that is really competing with our general sense of what gets creativity and art to the top. And so I think the lesson is be you, because you never know who may like it. There are people who consider the way they play a video game to be an art form, and they're making millions of dollars on Twitch with a channel, them playing an art form or being creative within a virtual or gaming context. And the same goes for any other art form. So this is an area where I think technology is democratizing who we are. But right on the heels of this, going back to that, are people exploring AI making songs, AI painting? And so on the heels are also virtual or digital forms of art that may be coming for our more traditional approaches. So I'd say, kind of keep that in mind as you create. But the lesson for me is be who you are, because there are many people who may love your niche and your perspective and approach.
That's cool. In just a moment, I'm going to share like 5 takeaways from these trends and what it means for kind of the future of work. But before I get there, I know you have a really good way of like not balancing, but paying attention to both all of the emerging frontier technology, and at the same time, you're thinking about the implications of that when it comes to policies and rules. And so part of this is you really do want to educate people on how rules impact business. What are some high-level thoughts for those listening in right now as they're trying to scale their work, for profit or non? What How do rules come into play, and how can they be strategic about engaging rules for their organizations?
Yeah, so I believe everyone is a rule maker. And I got to a lot of this. I used to talk about policy, but I don't even use that word anymore because you tell people you work in policy, they're like, what do you actually do? You talk to senators and shaking hands and kissing babies. Like, what is the thing you do? So I use rules because we all understand rules. And the reality is they're everywhere. They're in our households, they're in our organization, our churches, our nonprofits, our businesses, our societies. They're in relationships. Rules are really everywhere. And my perspective on this is that when you're trying to change society or do something new, you have a new approach or new technology, it's very likely that there's a rule in your way. And this has manifested itself in my world by, working on flying cars and drones and advanced medical devices. There are, you can have the technology done tomorrow, but you don't see flying cars out here or really drones everywhere, not because they're not ready, but because the rules really don't enable for that now. And there are technologies behind rules, there are approaches, there's politics, there's engineering behind rules. And the real reality is we're very bad at creating and making rules. And I got to this space because I usually am the guy that hates bad rules. I was the kid that hated bad rules. I was the kid that broke rules. I'm also a musician. I was a musician that liked to break rules. And I realized that breaking the rules is probably one of the weakest positions because you don't really get to shape the environment. You actually get to be counter to that environment. And eventually, if you're constantly in the rule breaking perspective, you're going to have to pay for it. And you've seen this with Facebook and Google. You have to get to the point where you're shaping and making the rules so that you're really the powerful player in the sense. And that's what the world's most, reputable and the world's most powerful companies do. And I'm not making an argument that it's right, because in many cases we don't want that. But they are controlling the rules. They're not controlling the pace of technology sometimes, or they're not the most leaning or the most innovative, but they're the ones that really control the rules. So it's an area I care about, and I'm happy to get into it more, but that's really the reason I care about it. And I think it's everywhere. And I think until we become better at shaping the rules, we won't have the future, we won't have the organizations, we won't really have the households that we dream about, because they are intertwined with the rules that we compose and that we keep in those spaces.
That's really good. In just a moment, we're actually going to answer some questions for some bonus question and response time with Travis. If you can stick around for a few more minutes after our time here, we welcome the conversation. Just in closing for this, as far as the trends, and then we'll go to the questions. And what do these trends mean for us? Here's some takeaway thoughts that I have. One is that, it's important, I think, to work towards a multidisciplinary approach to work. The future is changing pretty rapidly, and just being really good at one thing is still definitely very valuable, but understanding that there's layers to our work. So kind of mixing and learning and constantly working towards that, I think, is a good thing. Definitely critical thinking and complex problem solving is a skill set to develop. I don't know the last time, you may have worked on your critical thinking skills. But this is an area where it's not just problem solving. I feel like now there's so many ramifications for ideas, and to look at it at a multi-tier level, I think is really helpful. The other one is leverage the bias for creativity and execution right now, and work towards really developing that skill set. I know some of that may feel innate, and you may not feel like you are, quote unquote, a creative. But, really creativity in part is about problem solving as well. And so being able to leverage that opportunity you have to create solutions, meaningful solutions. The other one is, we didn't dive too much into this, but, emotional emotional intelligence, diversity and cultural intelligence, as well as communication skills, since communication is going to be a key to any business organization. And then really looking through that, what that means for your business, what that means for the people that you support, the customers that you serve, and leveraging that level of diverse thought into the mix is highly valuable. And then last but not least, technology, proficiency and integration. Even if you don't feel like that's a strong suit, it doesn't matter. That's the world we live in. And so getting over that mentally and moving forward, even though you may not know where to start, is still the right mindset. Let's figure this out. And sometimes we'll have people reach out to say, "Hey, how do you do this or that?" And sometimes we don't know, and we literally like Google Google like how to think about something or frame it, and it's amazing what you find. And so being able to use the resources that we have and the research we actually do have access to, and to create frameworks and things like that would be good. Do you have any like other closing thoughts as it relates to this, like some of the things that we found for far as like the future of work?
No, I think these are spot on.
Awesome. So let's go to some of our questions, and we'll close out our time. And I want to just ask a couple of questions. You could probably see this as well, Travis. Peter, thanks for tuning in. I'm going to just work backwards. Regarding the number 2 trend, so I'll go back just to refresh you what number 2 was. Curious about your take on the dangers of censorship under the guise of fact-checking. Who fact-checks? The fact-checkers and AI algorithms who are prone to flagging posts wrong and arguably infringe on free speech, or even taint slander the poster's reputation due to a lack of proper arbitration. For example, we recently seen the deletion of legitimate news posts and professional opinions on recent world events. I think you kind of get the gist of that question. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think going back to my point, the we're all rule makers. I think if companies realized that out the gate, they would have been in the position to approach some of this stuff a lot better and a lot sooner. And I think what you'll see is more and more resources put into Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, trying to determine what content is useful for the type of community they're trying to create. I think the only thing they can do is realize that this isn't a new problem. I mean, when I've had my teams at previous companies, I used to tell my teams, and I've learned through other folks, that you're not the first one to deal with this problem. Like, really managing the public square is a problem that people have been dealing with for decades, whether that's in a physical environment or a digital environment, and there are lessons within that. And so I think as long as we're learning those lessons, and as long as we put the robust resources into it, we'll decrease the likelihood that we'll make mistakes. I mean, it's a probability, and what we want to do is get that probability down that we won't make mistakes, but we will make mistakes. I mean, we can't get away from that.
Yeah. We also have Tommy, who joined us. He asked, can you address healthcare data collection, AI programming, care delivery, and policy? What trends do you see there? It sounds like you did do some more research in kind of the healthcare space. Do you see any emerging trends outside of what we've already discussed?
Yeah, so I would say watch what companies do, watch the new sorts of definitions that come into the law. Basically, HIPAA says the moment that anything kind of engages with what's called a covered entity, and that's like a hospital or your care provider, the moment that any sort of app comes into that sort of environment, it becomes essentially a covered thing. So it's covered under HIPAA, it has to be HIPAA compliant. And so I think you'll see a move to think about some gray areas where, if you're sharing data with your medical provider, maybe it doesn't need to have X restrictions, or maybe it doesn't need to be as covered as some of the other sorts of things. So you'll see a graying of the law, I think, a little bit. And then I think you'll see a desire for people to go back and look at HIPAA. I don't think we're anywhere near that, because Congress just takes its sweet time with a lot of really important topics. And so I don't expect us to have a reform of HIPAA in the next 2 years or any time of that being. But I think you'll see maybe some states take a look at it. I think you'll see some of the HHS or some of those agencies kind of gray some of the definitions within the law to enable innovation. So I think that's what you'll see moving forward, is a desire to figure this out, given the realities that our law wasn't written for these sorts of devices.
Yeah, no, that's good. One last question, and then we'll kind of close with this. And I think it was Ginny who asked, how do you reconcile virtual influencers with the value of authenticity? They would seem to be in conflict, but perhaps not. And I think I would say that, if you view it as a content piece for influence, to a certain extent, in the same way that if someone was creating a character for a movie, I think you can be authentic to the point of creating that character. And it's possible that you could, in some ways, be more mindful of your audience if you can leverage data in creating that character. And so, do you have any other thoughts, like, can virtual influencers be authentic?
Yeah, I think so. It's like going to Disney World and saying, like, getting off that ride and just saying, man, that was like amazing. Like, you were on a ride. You were not on it. It
Yeah,
wasn't real. It was a ride, and that ride was manufactured to make your brain and your sensors that are a part of your body feel like
yeah,
it was real. And so I think that reflex will extend to the virtual environment, and
yeah.
all the lessons that folks like the Imagineers and others have learned will be extended to these sorts of these virtual environments.
Yeah. Great. Well, Travis, thank you so much for your time, for being with us. And everyone who tuned in, just a quick note. I think what we're going to do is we've been taking some notes from here. We'll post it on YouTube. We'll also send you a follow-up email so you can get access to that. I'm going to also upload the slides that we're using to SlideShare, and we'll get you links to that as well. But thanks everyone for jumping in. Travis, do you have any like parting words? This was fun. We should do it again. I feel like we're having like lunch over Zoom right now.
No, it's just cool. I send my email across chat, so if any of you want to
Awesome.
connect off email, let me know. I'm not engaging on social media right now, but we'll be back. And it was so good to see a few folks I know, Chris, Peyton, and some others. So thanks for joining, and thanks, Charles, as always, for providing a platform for us to discuss these sorts of issues.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And then until next time, thanks for stopping by, everyone.